During the Christmas season of 1976, I sat down one night to watch television.
As we started looking for something to watch, every channel had something inappropriate on it.
There was nothing good.
I became angry that night. I left the parish ministry and founded the National Federation for Decency.
And I remember people going, "You're going to do what now, exactly?"
Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazo.
Hello, friends. God bless you and Merry Christmas season. Our guest coming up in just a few minutes, M.D. Perkins with American Family Association. When discussing the role of Christianity and Christians in today's culture, people often insist that believers should focus on changing hearts rather than changing politics. But according to the late Don E. Wildman at AFA, this is a false dichotomy that does not involve an either-or option. And we're going to talk today about the brand new project or recently released Culture Warrior movie through American Family Association. There it is, culturewarrior.movie. culturewarrior.movie. You can watch it for free right now. But I want to thank a new donor to the podcast, Worldview Matters, Jeff from Coppell, Texas. It might be Coppell, but I think it's Coppell, Texas. God bless you, brother. Thank you for your generous gift. And we are doing a fundraiser. Guys, I'll talk to you more about that about halfway through the podcast. But the website, worldviewmatters.tv. Couple more days of the fundraiser, and we're just so thankful for your prayers and your support. So I want to bring in M.D. Perkins. He's a research fellow of church and culture for the American Family Association. He joined AFA in 2014, and his primary role has been with American Family Studios, where he has written, produced, and directed a number of documentaries. They've been amazing. He produced and directed The God Who Speaks in 2018. Also was a producer on In His Image, and that was delighting in God's plan for gender and sexuality. We've had Laura Perry Smaltz on the podcast, and she was in that. His book, Dangerous Affirmation, The Threat of Gay Christianity, gives an in-depth look at the way the LGBT movement has impacted the church, unfortunately, and his other writing on sexuality issues can be assessed at a little Levin. And I quoted him in my book, Assault on the Image of God, wrote a lot about the transgender ideology. I quoted his book, Dangerous Affirmation. So M.D. Perkins, welcome to Worldview Matters. Good to see you, brother.
Yes, tink you, David. Good to be with you today.
So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about AFA. I love this organization, and I'm so thankful. I've talked to Tim Wildman before, and obviously Laura Perry was on. She was featured in His Image. But before we dive into Culture Warrior movie, thank you for your book, Dangerous Affirmation. I did quote you. I love it. It gets very informative and in-depth. And it was a much needed book at the time. And I know we talked about this several years ago. Could you speak to where we are as a culture and a church compared to maybe when you started writing that book? Because have things gotten better, worse? What have you noticed with the transgender ideology and the political battles in our country?
Well, there's been good news and bad news. I mean, obviously, in many respects, we've seen an overall growing support for the LGBT movement culturally overall, and we've seen that movement infiltrating the church. The rates at which even evangelicals are beginning to show support behind same-sex marriage has grown, 10% since 2014 to now. But at the same time, we're also seeing a growing awakening of people to the issues around this, particularly with the transgender movement. I know you're very familiar and probably following closely the Supreme Court case, some of the arguments being made there, Perhaps you've seen some of the things that are happening in the UK. With even in Britain, people are beginning to say this is not right, this is not good, and even in secular societies, people resisting this not from a Christian perspective, but seeing the harm that it's causing to teenagers, to young kids, to children, and the impact on free speech and all of these other things that it's beginning to have. So I think there is a general awakening that is happening among some people, but sadly, I think the church is very timid in speaking out too forwardly on this issue, and that's one of the things that I cover in the book, Dangerous Affirmation.
Yeah, why do you think that is? Why do you think, I mean, it's a matter of truth? I mean, aside from science and biology, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is biblical truth and God's creative order. So is it the pastors being afraid to touch on, quote, controversial issues? Is it because there's a lot of ignorance, it seems, in the body of Christ on this?
There is a lot of ignorance, and I think part of it is that that fear that's there, the fear of man overall. Also, this kind of general sense that we've been receiving over the years that somehow the real impact of the Great Commission is that we're supposed to be nice to people, or we're supposed to say nice things and kind of be perceived as generally nice and agreeable people, because we generally are nice and agreeable people. But there are those points of conflict where what we believe and what the Bible teaches rubs directly against what is being promoted in our culture. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book, is the fact that these are competing ideologies, and you will never be able to reconcile homosexuality and Christianity, but that's the attempt that's happening with the gay Christian movement.
Exactly. And it just astounds me as a Bible believer and a student of Scripture how much progress the left, the demoniacs, have made. But friends, if you can get Dangerous Affirmation, The Threat of Gay Christianity, you can get that on Amazon. Is there a better place? What website can they go to, MD?
If you go to dangerousaffirmation.net, you can kind of get it directly from the ministry. We're the one who published it, and so you can get it from us. But yeah, it is available on Amazon as well. Okay,
dangerousaffirmation.net. Very important book, friends. So thanks, MD. Now, the American Family Association, I love these guys. I love what you do. I'm glad you're a part of it. Founded in 1977, 501c3 nonprofit. And I'll tell you what, so you know the history now of AFA. You've been with them for several years. They have branched out into so many different venues, and they're doing some effective work in this country for righteousness, for the biblical morality. Share a little bit about the early development of AFA and just what you've perceived now that you've come on board and you've been with them for a while.
Well, the amazing thing about working on a documentary like this is that I get to spend countless hours really just digging through all of the history and the minutia, all these old files, old pictures, old videos, all this stuff. And, stuff, frankly, some of which that was on its way to the trash can, and I intercepted it on the way and said, no, let us look through this first. A handful of gems coming through that. But, Don Wildman, who was just a Methodist minister from here in Tupelo in Northeast Mississippi, founded the ministry because he was concerned about television. And he sat down one night, December 1976, to watch television with his family. And there was only three network stations at the time. I'm sure a number of people remember this. There was only ABC, CBS, and NBC. And on each one of those, he found something objectionable, and they were each objectionable from a different perspective. One was a kind of adulterous affair that was becoming more and more seductive. One was obscenity and profanity kind of on the show. And then one was this violent act, but with one man beating another with a hammer. And he was sitting down to watch TV in the Christmas season. He's ready to just enjoy something that was festive or, sentimental or something, just generally, good, wholesome entertainment for the family. So he had his son turn off the TV, Tim, who's now president of AFA, but Tim was in high school at the time, and he had Tim turn off the TV, and Don sat there and kind of contemplated what had happened, what had happened in the course of his life, born in the mid 1930s, and, was kind of used to a certain way that society functioned and the way that people thought, and was realizing that was not the case anymore. And it wasn't that these were completely new revelations to him. He had noticed that there were more and more raunchy things on TV and in movies and stuff, but it hit him that night just how passive he had been. And so that's what motivated him to get involved. He organized something called Turn the Television Off Week. He went to his local congregation, got them on board, and then through that began to realize, really, I need to leave the pastoral ministry and step into more of this public activism and advocacy front in order to awaken the church and believers to the things that have been happening while we have been asleep. While we have just been sitting by passively with this live and let live approach without really realizing that God has called us to something more. He's called us to be able to speak to the issues publicly. And in America, we have the opportunity to do that as citizens. So, just really kind of taking up that mantle. And so it grew. AFA's grown from that initial concern of television to dealing with questions of pornography, anti-Christian bias in the media, the homosexual agenda, and just so many other fronts, from the political front to the social front to issues arising in the church and in denominations. AFA has been actively involved in trying to raise awareness and not just like talk about it, but get Christians involved. Like, what can we do to make a difference? And that was really what it was all about.
And that's needed more today than ever, because the the moral decline and the biblical literacy. So you've got two things happening at the same time, which, the church kind of drives culture, or it should, but it doesn't work that way anymore. Culture is driving the church. But that was in the late 1970s, MD Perkins. He was noticing this and going, what have we been doing about this as the body of Christ? And here we are today. So I'm thankful for the work you guys have done, afa.net, and continue to do. But friends, I want to give the website again for the Culture Warrior movie, and it is culturewarrior.movie. And at the very beginning of this podcast today, we showed a 30-second trailer. There is a 2.5-minute trailer you can watch if you go to culturewarrior.movie. So we'll jump around a little bit, MD, today, and I want to say Merry Christmas to you. Merry Christmas season.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
And I also want to talk about the Christmas campaign. Say Merry Christmas, right? People think that's not a big deal. If people want to say Happy Holidays, let them say Happy Holidays. What are your thoughts about just that?
Well, it's interesting. I was just watching an NFL football game the other night, and one of the commentators was reading the script about something that you could do at your holiday party, your office holiday party. And I thought, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, just from a linguistic perspective. I'm sitting down to watch a professional sports game tonight. I'm not watching a NFL football game. I'm watching a professional sports game. It's just losing that aspect of specificity, but even more deeply, we recognize that there is an affront to anything that recognizes Jesus or Christianity as being involved in the shaping and molding of American culture and society. So it's just, these were things that Don and AFA have been involved in for a long time. Don was recognizing some of these early movements. He spoke about the anti-Christian bias that was creeping into movies and television, the way that television depictions rarely ever had a character on there in the modern day that was a Christian, without it being some kind of kooky character or somebody who's a psychopath or just, really hypocritical and all of these things. So I think it feeds into this long-standing thing that's been influenced by secular humanism and all these other things to just eradicate the Christian influence from society, even though everybody still recognizes what Christmas is, and even that word Christmas. But it's funny, that resistance to even the word Christmas that we see even today.
How offensive. Oh, you said eradicate. That was my first book. My first book was Eradicate, Blotting Out God in America. This is what's been happening. And I think AFA has opened a lot of eyes of people. But I just want to mention, by the way, it was originally, AFA was named the National Federation for Decency and then changed to American Family Association, 1988. So let me just, so I keep track, I was telling you before we got on the show that I keep track of watch television commercials, not everyone, but when I do watch a movie or a show and I see commercials that obviously the red and the green and the presents, and they even have a tree, maybe Santa's involved somehow, but they never mention Christmas. Very rarely do you hear Christmas anymore. I just want to mention a handful, and then we'll have to take a break, and we'll get your thoughts when we come back. Macy's, all things holiday. This holiday season. How about Verizon? This holiday. Amazon, early holiday deals. Cracker Barrel, we holiday the country way. LL Bean, just for you, shop the best gifts. Zales, find something for everyone on your holiday list. Ross, save big on holiday decor. Pizza Hut, this holiday. Lowe's knows how to help your holiday. And that's a partial list. MD will get your thoughts on that and talk more about the Culture Warrior movie when we come back on Worldview Matters.
Today's show is brought to you by Harbinger's Daily, world news biblically understood. Stay informed at harbingersdaily.com.
Hey friends, we're running another campaign here to support the show for another 6 months. Keep us going with production costs, and your prayers help drive us, and also your financial donations. So what we're doing is offering, if for those of you able to contribute a one-time gift of $200 or more, or a recurring gift of $25 a month, we'd love to send you these brand new commemorative rose gold pen sets with Worldview Matters on them. I use them here. I love them. Very high quality pens. Also, for first-time donors, we would love to send you, as our way of saying thank you, our mug, Worldview Matters, and on one side, it's my tagline, keep speaking the truth about things that matter. So worldviewmatters.tv, your gifts are tax deductible. So MD Perkins, American Family Association, what are your thoughts on the blatant, almost whitewashing of Christmas, or Merry Christmas, or mentioning Christ during this time of year? It's astounding in the United States of America, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just more of the erosion. I mean, this is the long-standing influence of secular humanism that wants to pretend as if secularism is normal life, and that people have no real religious influence or persuasion or interest at all, except of course, now Apple is assaulting us with all the Muslim holidays on our on our phones and calendar apps and all of that. But it's just, I don't know. It's ridiculous too. I mean, the word holiday as if it's just some generic term. No, there's a specific holiday that we're celebrating, and it's okay to acknowledge it, even if you're not a Christian, even if you're not really celebrating it for the reason religiously that Christians are celebrating it, with the advent of Christ and Christ coming into the world to take on human flesh and save people from their sins. I mean, that's why we celebrate it, and we extend that out to some of the festivities of gift giving and merrymaking and all these sorts of things. But it's just ridiculous. Like I was saying, it's like saying I'm just going to sit down and watch professional sports game instead of saying that I'm going to watch a football game. Just linguistically, it's silly and foolish. But we recognize there's something more underneath it. That's
oh yeah, absolutely, and it goes back a long ways, and it is demonically driven because you want to remove all references to Christianity, Christ, the truth. I want to mention, for nearly 4 decades, Don Wildman served as a founding figure in the pro-family movement. He's been on the front lines, and that's why I appreciate AFA so much. And so, MD, I want to quote Tim Wildman, and then let you continue to respond regards the Culture Warrior movie. He said, this is back in the 1970s, along with others like Dr. James Dobson and Dr. D. James Kennedy, a lot of what my dad saw was the cultural and moral decline going on in America. He wanted to try to do something to stop it, or at least hold it back, because he knew, like others who were looking into the future, that if America began to reject the Judeo-Christian heritage of our country and our founders, we would eventually end up where we are now, end quote. That's from Tim, Don Wildman's son, who's now the president of AFA. So your thoughts on that? That was almost prophetic, what Don was doing and what Don was looking ahead to seeing. If we don't get more Christians involved, more culture warriors to resist this evil and to promote righteousness and to stand on the truth, we're going to be in a very dangerous place one day. Go ahead, MD.
Yeah, Don was often characterized, I think rightly, we could say at this point, as a prophet, speaking to people, speaking to the church, whoever would listen, and trying to point people back toward righteousness and truth, and frankly, just common sense a lot of times now. Kind of the battle that we're facing these days. But, I think there was a lot of stirring that was happening there in the late 1970s, early 80s. You think of the ministries that were begun at that point, the rise of prominence of men like Dr. James Dobson and Jerry Falwell and D. James Kennedy, and some of these figures that were speaking not only Christian truth and the gospel message, but also linking that to Christian involvement in the culture and society and speaking out on social issues. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do in the Culture Warrior documentary, is to make that connection for people, especially younger viewers who may not realize the history behind the movement. They may just remember something like the Disney boycott in the late 90s and think, well, Christians were just kind of irritated about, they saw something kind of weird in a Disney movie one time and it made them upset. Well, no, there was a lot of concern about what happens when you start to normalize homosexuality. For instance, in the case of the Disney boycott, there were corporate policies that had changed at the Disney corporate level. This was the mid to late 90s, by the way. Think about Disney now, but the corporate policies were changing. They were starting to host gay days at Disney, which were these kind of exclusive, but were not advertised nationally, but were advertised within homosexual magazines and periodicals and things like that. And then families were showing up just ready for a normal family vacation, and then suddenly they see two guys walking down the street holding hands and kissing each other, and they're like, wait, why are all of these people here at the same time? What's going on? And then they to realize, and of course Disney brass denied it for a while, but these are the stories of the culture wars, dispatches from the culture war, as I like to describe it. These are the stories of things that have happened that I think many people have forgotten about, why Christians have been involved in these things. What were those initial concerns? You spoke about holding things back. The pornography issue is something that began to be something that Don focused on very heavily in the 1980s, especially with convenience stores selling Playboy and Penthouse pornographic magazines. And of course, there were worse things in Playboy and Penthouse magazines in terms of the depictions, but Don always emphasized the fact that these were softcore magazines. And yes, there was harder things out there, but he said those things are prosecutable. The hardcore stuff is prosecutable. But if we can get people to deal with the softcore pornography, it'll be much easier to deal with some of the hardcore stuff that are in kind of these other places. And, if you walk into I don't know where people shop, if it's a Kroger or a Walmart or whatever, but, I walk into a Kroger store, and I look at the magazine rack, which still exists, even though people are not as into magazines. And you know what I don't see? I don't see Playboy and Penthouse magazine. Now, that is not because Kroger just of its own goodwill just decided to no longer host these magazines on its shelves. That was the result of Christians being involved in the efforts in the 1980s because of guys like Don Wildman raising awareness about this, getting Christians involved to speak at their local supermarkets and convenience stores and drugstores and things like this, and to complain, because oftentimes he noted at the time that the managers of these stores would say, I would like to get rid of these magazines, but I have to have a formal complaint from a customer before I can actually make a case for removing them. But I'm just kind of waiting. And Don would kind of make that connection for people of like,
Awesome.
there are reasons that you can make a stand. You can stand up and speak out and have a difference. So even now, we are living in the fruit of some of that effort. Like, yes, there have been numerous declines, and other people still have to take up the mantle. And pornography technologically has changed from magazines to internet and phone and videos and all those kinds of things. But there are still ways that we can stand up and speak out and have a difference. And that was one of the big messages we want people to see, to take away from the documentary Culture Warrior, is that one person can make a difference.
Amen, brother. Amen. Again, the website, friends, culturewarrior.movie. So 2017, I think, if I remember right, MD Perkins, Target Corporation changed their bathroom policy to allow biological males to go into women's dressing rooms and restrooms. I don't think they have reversed that policy. And some corporations are doubling down on this. And where do you see this going? And because I don't see enough resistance, and they're quietly continuing to support transgender ideologies with their big, section with LGBT merchandise. Go ahead. Your thoughts in the last 3 minutes here. Where do you see this going, and what else can we do?
Well, part of the issue here is that there's a guy named Daryl Paul, who's a sociologist, who made the case that part of the reason that corporations were so involved in the marriage fight is because they held up gay marriage as basically an icon of what it means to be a cultural elite. The idea that that you want to be seen as someone who's intellectual and all of these things. So it will take a lot of resistance, I think, from the public in order to really pull down some of these things at the corporate level, because these are ideologies that are bought into very heavily by the administrators and executives and things like this. But what we are seeing is that sometimes behind the scenes there is resistance to this because it's seen as not reaching the same market that they want to reach. And so quietly behind the scenes, corporations will change their policies or shift things without making public statement, and no press releases are coming out about this, but they will shift some of their policies and things behind the scenes because they want to acknowledge that still the majority of people recognize how foolish and ridiculous this is. That if you can't define what a man or a woman is, then you don't have any real position to be on the Supreme Court for. First, but even more broadly, it just it upends all sorts of ability for just basic dialogue and conversation and debate and all of that. So I think there is a growing resistance to some of those things at the public level.
Well, I hope there's more, and I hope more churches, pastors have to get a spine, a backbone. I think more pastors have to get on board with this. Like Pastor Story Hour. There's a couple that are doing that instead of the drag story hours. They're reading kids' books or reading biblical stories. And there was some resistance to that, by the way. A lot of libraries didn't want them to do that. But anyway, there's a lot of good movements. I think we need a lot more. But MD, I would love to have you back. There's so much more to talk about. But I appreciate AFA's stance and a couple things that they continue to try to do to inform, equip, and activate individuals to strengthen the moral foundations of American culture and give aid to the church. Help the church get out there and fight these battles. Friends, check out Dangerous Affirmation by M.D. Perkins. Great book, and also a Culture Warrior movie. This is so important, guys. So it's a great topic where we will continue to have to talk about these things. So, brother, Merry Christmas, and say hi to our friends there at AFA. Thanks for your time.
Merry Christmas, and thank you for the time.
You're most welcome, MD. All right, Lord willing, we will have him back. Thank you guys so much for sharing the podcast. Merry Christmas. God bless you. And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.